Hi there, Frontline Church family and friends. Today we are in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 12, 12b, the second part of verse 12 through to the end of the chapter, verse 27. And Paul is explaining to the church in Corinth, the church that he founded and oversees as an apostle, he's explaining to them, A, that it is right for them to financially support their leaders, and B, that it is right for him at this time not to receive financial support from them. That's the general thrust of the passage. Now, he uses Old Testament scripture and Old Testament imagery to prove his point that they should be financially supporting leaders. So, for example, he draws a comparison between the tithe of the Old Testament that allowed the priests of the temple to serve at the altar. He compares that to financially supporting those that the Lord has commanded to preach. And he actually uses that phrase, in the same way. He says that thing that happened back in the past, in the same way we follow that principle today. So I think we're just seeing one of many examples of the earliest church preserving the idea of tithing. And I think that's even more interesting as we've been journeying through Acts, then Romans, and then through the last few chapters of 1 Corinthians, chapter 7 and 8 in particular. I was talking about apostolic authority. And what Paul is doing is he's taking what might be considered then and even today a little bit of an ambiguous idea. Tithing, does the New Testament support tithing or not? Does it support it in the same way as the Old Testament or not? How does that factor in with grace and freedom that he's been talking about? He's been taking this slightly ambiguous idea and he's been using his apostolic authority to say, this is how we do it in our community. And he also points out that in yesterday's reading, that's slightly different and slightly similar to how it works with the Lord's brother James and Cephas, Peter. So there's both similarity and difference. So it's about how it's defined and interpreted once again within community through leadership apostolic authority. Paul then uses this language of rights, what he believes to be his rights. And for him, he is saying that he has a right as an apostle to be financially supported by those whom he has oversight over. But then he says, that he believes it's not right for him to insist on that right. So he is clearly working to create income. We know he was a tent maker, if you remember his story in Acts. And basically he's doing all of this as a volunteer. And most people serving the Lord do it as volunteers. And I love being a school teacher and serving the Lord voluntarily in the local church. And Paul actually talks about this greater reward. There is a greater reward for those who serve in a voluntary way than in a paid professional manner. Finally, just this little bit about Paul becoming like the Jew to win the Jew. And that very famous verse, becoming all things to all men that he might win some. And that idea of all things to all men, it's not like he's trying to please everyone. I mean, just look at how Paul speaks to the churches that he oversees in these letters. He is not a people pleaser, Paul. He says it straight. But what he means by all things to all men is that he might win some to Jesus. In other words, Paul is making mission, witness, reaching people for the gospel, the highest decision-making factor in his decision-making. And I certainly have learnt that being mentored by people like Nick Harding over the years. In our decision-making, we keep the mission the main thing. that leads us into a greater fruitfulness and impact in our decision making. And that's true for us as individuals, as families, as a spiritual family. We keep the mission the main thing about winning people to Jesus, and everything else just seems to fall into place a lot better. Have a blessed day.